Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Jack reaches out to Jill, and Claire turns to him after ditching Kyle. Editors have picked all of the featured goods and services on their own. On orders placed through its retail connections, soaps.com might get paid a commission, and the retailer might get some auditable data for their records. Victor, Victoria, and Nick are all talking about Kane, so Nikki complains to them about it at the ranch. The Newmans then go on to reiterate Ashby's warning once more. According to Victor, Jack arrived with a desperate proposition that they collaborate. Victor explains that he thinks they can use Jill to make Kane vulnerable and then crush him, which is a slight departure from Jack's perspective. Nick, Victoria. Nikki acknowledges that she fears her husband will take Jack's olive branch and beat him with it after Victoria and Nick have left. He moans, "Why the hell do you care about that?" Nikki, Victor. Is Sally able to convince Audra? Audra tries to discuss her business ideas with Sally at Chancellor Park, where she is prepared for a run, but her friend says Abbott Communications might be back on track. The fact that her friend has returned to Billy does not impress Audra. Sally explains that after giving him an ultimatum, they made progress. Audra believes Sally is trying too hard to persuade herself, and she questions Billy's sincerity. According to Spectra, her eyes are wide open. Audra, Sally. Audra advises her to separate her career from her partner. Audra is concerned that Billy would micromanage Abbott Communications as they discuss how it would operate. Even worse, they don't have any money. Audra is annoyed that they are once more at the mercy of men, but Sally is sure that Jack will save them. Audra, Sally. What is Claire going to tell Kyle? Harrison welcomes Claire, demonstrates his Italian, and gives her a hug in the Abbott estate. The boy hugs Kyle and Claire while they talk about his going back to school. Harrison, Kyle, Claire. Kyle and Claire remark about how much they've missed Harrison and her new job as they get back from dropping off the kids at school, but the polite talk soon ends. He is unsure of what else he can do to make things better and wants they could live a regular life together. When Billy makes a request, what will Jack say? Jack tells Jill she looks very well during a video call at Jabot. Assuming Billy is disintegrating once more, she says, "Who is in trouble now and how bad is it?" Jack acknowledges that Kane is to blame for the high stakes. She finds it hard to comprehend why he is viewed as such a danger by everyone. Jack advises her to return quickly to learn more about her surrogate son's activities. Jack cuts the call short when Billy knocks on the door. Billy claims that after Sally gave him a hard talk, he is back on track. By pledging that this will be the final time, he hopes to persuade his brother to invest in Abbott Communications once more. Jack declines. His brother has pushed him too far, but he is sure of Sally. "Your words have lost their meaning," Jack remarks. He doesn't believe Billy will quit playing games or take a back seat. Billy is adamant about making it happen. Jack hopes he has a successful future. Billy, Jack. How will Nick communicate with Victoria? Nick and Victoria at Society concur that their dad's collaboration with Jack and Jill will not work out. They are talking about how much Billy hates Jill when Kane walks by. Billy, in Nick's opinion, remains a wild card. Nick believes Kane is merely greedy and has nothing better to do, and they question why he is even bothering with this. Turning around, Nick informs Victoria that he and Sharon will be going out of town for a few weeks. Victoria believes that his absence during whatever is going on between Jack and their father is best. Nick, Victoria. How is Billy going to deliver the bad news? After work, Billy discovers Sally and Audra at Crimson Lights. Jack declined to provide them with funding, as Sally properly surmises. Billy tells her, "This isn't over," repeating a sentence we've heard a lot. Will Victor join Jack's team? When Jack gets to the ranch, Nikki has been telling her husband that she fears Jill will support Kane. Jack asks the mustache bluntly if he has given his suggestion any thought. Even though it's disgusting, do they have a deal? Jack responds. What will Claire do next? Claire explains to Kyle at the Abbott estate that this isn't about him or his actions. She's given the people in her life too much authority to dictate to her and jumped into their relationship too soon. She should make her own mistakes in the world, according to her instincts. He remarks, "It sounds like you're ending our relationship." Although Claire claims it won't be permanent, she needs space to live alone. Claire. After crying for 30 seconds at Chancellor Park, Claire pulls out her phone to call her first possible heir, Holden, and inquire as to whether his invitation to Los Angeles is still valid. Jack Abbott had never been a man to let silence weigh too heavily on him, but on this particular evening, as the sun dipped behind the Genoa city skyline and shadows stretched long over the Abbott estate, he found himself pacing the Jabot office with a nervous energy that seemed more fitting for a younger man on the brink of reckless adventure rather than the seasoned patriarch he had become, because deep down he knew that reaching out to Jill was not simply a business strategy but a desperate maneuver born from the unraveling chaos Kane Ashby had left in his wake, and though Jill had often been both ally and adversary over the years, her connection to Kane as a surrogate mother and her instinct to protect her family's legacy gave Jack reason to believe she could be swayed, especially when the Newman clan's whispers about Kane's hidden agendas were already stirring the pot, with Victor telling Victoria and Nick at the ranch that Jack had arrived with what he called a desperate proposition for collaboration, a plan to use Jill to expose Kane's weaknesses and crush him before his influence spread further into Genoa City's delicate web of power, though Victor himself confessed it was less about strategy and more about settling scores, a motivation that both Victoria and Nick regarded with caution even as Nicky, ever the voice of wary wisdom, reminded her husband that any olive branch from Jack Abbott was likely to come wrapped in thorns sharp enough to draw blood, prompting Victor to growl that sometimes blood was the price of victory, while Nicky, shaking her head in quiet frustration, asked him why he always seemed more concerned with beating Jack than protecting their family, but Victor refused to concede the point, his eyes narrowing with that familiar glint of ruthless determination that had defined his reign as Genoa City's most formidable titan. Meanwhile, across town, Sally Spectra laced her sneakers at Chancellor Park, ready for a jog that was more about clearing her head than fitness, only to find herself cornered by Audra Charles, who arrived with her usual blend of confidence and calculation, immediately diving into a conversation about business ideas and Abbott communications as if the morning air itself demanded corporate strategy, though Sally, flushed from her personal battles, revealed that her relationship with Billy had taken a positive turn after she'd given him an ultimatum, something Audra regarded with thinly veiled skepticism, arching an eyebrow and asking if Sally truly believed Billy's newfound dedication was real or if she was simply trying to convince herself, but Sally, with a defiant spark in her eyes, countered that she wasn't blinded by love, she knew exactly who Billy Abbott was and what he was capable of, but she was also determined to keep her eyes wide open, even if that meant walking a tightrope between heartbreak and triumph, yet Audra, never one to sugarcoat, warned her that blending business with romance was a recipe for disaster, pointing out that Billy's tendency to micromanage and spiral could sink Abbott communications faster than they could raise it, and as their conversation circled the familiar refrain of being at the mercy of powerful men, Sally countered with faith that Jack would ultimately step in to steady the ship, a claim that only made Audra's frustration deepen, because in her mind relying on Jack Abbott was like waiting for a storm to turn into sunshine. It was possible, but the odds weren't in anyone's favor. At the Abbott mansion, however, the storm was already brewing in the form of Claire Grace, who had just returned from dropping Harrison at school with Kyle, her heart caught in the bittersweet pull of belonging and restlessness, because while Harrison's joyful embrace and adorable Italian phrases filled her with warmth, the tension with Kyle was becoming harder to ignore, as polite small talk about missed moments and new job responsibilities quickly dissolved into the unspoken truth. Their relationship was fracturing, and Kyle, with a furrowed brow and desperate eyes, admitted that he didn't know what else he could do to fix things, longing for the regular life they once imagined but increasingly aware that Claire was slipping through his fingers, not because of his failures alone but because she was beginning to recognize how often she had let others dictate her choices, her instincts whispering that she needed to step out from under the shadows of men like Kyle, Victor, and even Jack, and make her own mistakes in the world. So when she told Kyle this wasn't about him but about reclaiming her autonomy, his heart cracked at the realization that she was, in essence, ending their relationship, even if she softened the blow by insisting it wasn't permanent, just space she needed to discover who she truly was. Yet as soon as she walked away and found herself standing alone in Chancellor Park, her tears fell freely for 30 seconds before she pulled out her phone, her trembling hands dialing the number of Holden Novak, the one man who had offered her escape and adventure, asking if his invitation to Los Angeles was still valid, a decision that would mark the beginning of a seismic shift in both her life and the tangled web of Abbott and Newman drama. Back at Jabot, Jack's video call with Jill began with pleasantries, compliments on her radiant appearance and banter about who was in trouble now, but the conversation quickly turned serious as Jack confessed that Kane had become the source of their escalating crisis, though Jill, skeptical as ever, found it difficult to understand why everyone seemed to view Kane as such a dire threat, dismissing him as more nuisance than nemesis, yet Jack urged her to return to Genoa City and see for herself, hinting that her surrogate son's activities were more dangerous than she realized. But before he could press further, Billy knocked on his office door, forcing Jack to cut the call short and face a brother who seemed almost reborn after Sally's tough love, brimming with renewed determination to secure funding for Abbott Communications, pledging that this final time, he was ready to prove himself, though Jack, weary of broken promises, refused, telling Billy that his words had lost all meaning and that he no longer believed in a future where his brother could stop playing games or take a back seat, a refusal that wounded Billy but also fueled his resolve, as he stormed out vowing that Jack would regret underestimating him. Meanwhile, at Society, Nick and Victoria mulled over their father's unlikely collaboration with Jack, both agreeing that it was doomed to fail, especially given Victor's history of turning partnerships into battlefields. But their discussion was cut short when Kane himself sauntered past, his presence igniting Victoria's irritation and Nick's cynicism, because while Nick dismissed him as nothing more than greedy and aimless, Victoria reminded her brother that Kane's unpredictability made him dangerous, though when Nick revealed he and Sharon would be leaving town for a few weeks, she admitted that his absence might actually be a blessing, sparing him from the fallout of whatever twisted games their father and Jack were about to play. Because in her heart she knew this fragile alliance would not end quietly. The fallout began almost immediately when Billy, still stung by Jack's rejection, stumbled upon Sally and Audra at Crimson Lights, where Sally, quick to read his expression, guessed correctly that Jack had refused funding, and though Billy repeated with steely determination that this isn't over, his words rang hollow, echoing a phrase everyone had grown weary of hearing, but whether hollow or not, they set the stage for more reckless moves. Later, when Jack arrived at the Newman ranch, Nikki was already warning Victor that Jill might side with Kane, a scenario that threatened to undo all their careful maneuvering, but Jack, his patience worn thin, cut through the pleasantries and asked Victor point-blank if he'd considered his offer, forcing Victor to confront the distasteful reality of working alongside a man he despised. And though both men acknowledged how disgusting the arrangement was, the question remained, were they willing to make a deal with the devil they knew in order to destroy the one they didn't fully understand? And as all of Genoa City seemed to hold its breath, waiting for alliances to solidify and betrayals to unfold, Claire stood at a crossroads of her own, her phone call to Holden symbolizing not just an escape from Kyle but a leap into the unknown, her instincts telling her that leaving behind the safety of the Abbott name might finally allow her to live for herself, though in true soap fashion. No one could predict whether that choice would lead her to love, heartbreak, or the kind of danger that had already claimed too many souls in Genoa City's endless cycle of power, passion, and peril. Claire stood frozen in Chancellor Park with her phone pressed to her ear, her breath coming in uneven bursts as Holden Novak's familiar voice echoed across the line, calm and steady in a way that only magnified the chaos in her own heart. Because while she tried to sound confident when she asked if his invitation to Los Angeles still stood, the tremor in her voice betrayed how deeply uncertain she was about uprooting her life, leaving Harrison, Kyle, and the fragile sense of family she had tried so desperately to build. But Holden, never one to hesitate, assured her that his offer remained as solid as the day he first made it, promising that LA could be a place where she wasn't defined by other people's expectations, where she could chase her dreams without being weighed down by the baggage of Newman and Abbott rivalries. And as his words washed over her, Claire felt the pull of freedom stronger than ever, yet the thought of Harrison's smiling face tugged at her heart like an anchor, reminding her that every choice came with a cost, so even as she told Holden she was considering it, her tears betrayed how torn she truly was, standing in the quiet park as if at the edge of two lives, one filled with familiar obligations and one brimming with terrifying possibility. Across town at the Newman Ranch, Jack Abbott was finding himself at an equally precarious crossroads, staring down Victor Newman with the kind of resolve born only from decades of battles fought and lost and fought again, because while the idea of partnering with Victor disgusted him, the threat Kane posed was real enough to force his hand, and when Victor leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as Nicky hovered protectively at his side, Jack pressed forward with blunt determination, insisting that Kane's rise in influence wasn't merely about greed but about disruption, that Kane thrived on chaos and manipulation, a danger that could destabilize not just Jabot or Chancellor but the entire balance of power in Genoa City. Yet Victor, ever the strategist, wanted proof, asking Jack what made him so sure Kane was capable of bringing them all to their knees, and Jack, with a fire in his eyes, recounted how Kane had been slowly embedding himself in every vulnerable corner of their lives, exploiting Billy's recklessness, tempting Jill's maternal blind spots, and even planting seeds of doubt within Kyle and Claire's fragile relationship, because unlike other rivals, Kane wasn't charging headfirst into battle, he was quietly poisoning wells and waiting for the thirst to set in, a tactic Victor begrudgingly admitted was clever, though Nicky, folding her arms with icy skepticism, reminded them both that teaming up might only create a monster greater than the one they were trying to defeat, warning that history had proven Abbott-Newman alliances always ended in betrayal, but Victor brushed her off, telling Jack that if he truly wanted this partnership, the first step would be convincing Jill to abandon Kane, because without her allegiance, their plan would crumble before it began. Unbeknownst to them, Jill Abbott was already on her way back to Genoa City, her flight booked the moment she hung up on Jack's call, her mind racing with questions about how Kane had once again become the epicenter of drama. Because while she loved him as if he were her own, she couldn't ignore the nagging sense that trouble always followed him like a shadow, yet as her plane cut through the clouds, she vowed that she would get to the bottom of the truth herself, unwilling to rely solely on Jack's warnings or Victor's scheming, because if Kane truly was plotting something dangerous, she wanted to hear it from his own lips before making any decisions about loyalty. At the same time, Billy Abbott was unraveling in ways he refused to admit, storming into Crimson Lights with an energy that made heads turn, his conversation with Sally and Audra spiraling into a mix of bravado and desperation, insisting that Jack's rejection wasn't the end but only a temporary setback, though Sally, sharp enough to see through the facade, asked him point-blank how many times he could promise that things would be different before people stopped believing him, a jab that cut deep, though Billy masked it with his trademark smirk, declaring that he didn't need Jack's blessing or money to make Abbott Communications a success, because he had vision, he had passion, and most importantly, he had something to prove. But Audra, with her calculating pragmatism, reminded him that vision without funding was nothing more than a fantasy, and unless he wanted to run his company out of his living room, he'd need to find real investors, which only pushed Billy further into a reckless mindset, muttering that if Jack wouldn't invest, he'd find someone who would, even if it meant crossing lines he once swore he'd never cross, leaving Sally with a sinking feeling that Billy was about to plunge headfirst into yet another disaster. Meanwhile, Nick Newman's decision to leave town with Sharon weighed heavily on Victoria as she sat alone at society nursing a glass of wine, because while she agreed that Nick's absence might shield him from the fallout of their father's latest power play, she couldn't shake the gnawing unease that Kane's presence wasn't as harmless as Nick believed, especially when she spotted Kane himself dining casually at the bar, his easy smile and relaxed demeanor giving the impression of a man with nothing to hide, though Victoria knew better.